Hi everyone, welcome to the first FEDSA meetup of the year. Good to have you back. Um, as you may know already, I'm Justin, and with me is Skulk. We're the co-organizers and founders of this whole thing. So just to get started, we just want to go through the usual thank yous and a couple of announcements, and then I'll introduce Skulk, and he'll take us off into his talk. Okay, so yeah, we've got two recurring sponsors. Those are NML, who's been sponsoring us since the Cape Town front-end developer days, around 10 years now, maybe as long as that, I think. So many thanks to them. And then IO Digital, which is a software development and design company in Cape Town. And we have received great support from them, in particular from Liesel Bester over the years. So again, thanks to them, they allow us to bring you these regular events. Then we also have for our hackathons, Code Capsules. We want to thank them for sponsoring the space at Workshop 17. We're very grateful for that. Yeah, look out for some exciting things happening in that space in the coming year. And then just two calls for papers that are still out. Node.js 1, which FEDSA is involved with, is a JavaScript conference. And if you would like to submit a paper for that or just get general information on that, you can check out that URL. I'll post it in the chat as well. And then DevConf, South Africa's, I think, longest running and certainly biggest developer conference, also have their call for papers out for the 2023 version. I think that's closing fairly soon, so time to get on that if you are interested in presenting that. Finally, just a couple of things that are coming up. So we kind of have a relationship with the South African product design group, ZAPD. Skulk and I are admins on those as well, because we like having no free time at all. And we've got a panel discussion coming up on the 30th of January and around getting your first design job. So if anyone knows any UI designers or UX designers who might be interested in that, please go and share that. And then our next FEDSA meetup will also be next week on the 31st of January, and that will be functional programming in React with Zandor Schleifer, who's done quite a number of presentations for us over the years. They're always really, really high quality. Zandor is a really great person within the front-end community, extraordinarily knowledgeable. And yeah, we always learn some great things from him. So hopefully you can come and join us for that. Right. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Skulk. If you've been part of FEDSA for a while, I probably don't need to introduce him at all. I've known Skulk for many years. We've been running FEDSA for a long time together, and he's an extremely dedicated person in the community. He's an educator, he's a developer, he's a designer. He has fantastically great ideas. And one thing that I have huge respect for him about is how open he is around kind of mental health issues and how those can affect anybody. But in particular today, he's going to talk to us about how they can affect us, particularly as tech workers. As Joshua just said, Skulk for president. So I second that.
Please no, unless you want load shedding to be twice as bad.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Skulk, I'm going to remove myself and add your slides. And yeah, thank you so much. And let's get.
Oh.
I think it's just the screen that you're sharing. You need to share a different screen.
Oh, my bad. There we go.
There we
Okay.
go.
Is that better?
That is much better.
Sorry, it's like I think this December break has been too long. What's it? It's been like what 2 months now without a talk. So like I think I'm still a bit rusty in terms of how the streaming works. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Like you can probably see here in the background Apologies for just the absolute mess that is my house at the moment. I have a 1-year-old daughter, which you might hear in the background. And for those of you that don't know just yet, now is as good a time as any to announce it, because I see there's quite a lot of people that actually joined that I actually know personally. We are actually expecting a second one, so which is also why things have just been all over the place the last couple of weeks and months. So cool. With that out of the way, let's get into this. So I maybe want to start with a disclaimer. It's always a good sign when you start a talk with a disclaimer, and that is that to a large degree, I myself am still trying to make sense of a lot of these things. That means that I don't necessarily know what is useful to talk about, what is not useful to talk about. This is the second time I'm talking about this topic. I did a talk on it maybe a year and a half ago, and which I just threw as much content into it as possible, hoping something would stick. I think I maybe like touched on too many different things, so took out quite a lot of things, um, in the hope also that like there's more time for maybe discussion and questions and back and forth. Which to that, please leave any questions you have in the comments, in the text comments. I'm more than happy to stop every now and then, look at it, and maybe kind of speak to them. Maybe give my own like take on it. Try and answer it as best I can. I also see Gideon is also here. So both Roger and Gideon are here. I've recently been speaking to them as well, kind of about a lot of these things, trying to make sense of it, and also trying to figure out how discussions around this can be framed in a useful or helpful manner. And to a certain degree, I hope you guys are going to help me figure that out tonight. So you've kind of been bamboozled into actually helping me instead of me helping you guys. So, all right, let's get first things first out of the way. Who am I? Super quick overview. As Justin mentioned, I somehow at some point in my life started doing like a semi-career transition into the world of education and training and teaching. Started out as just doing a couple of guest lecturing here and there, and then like people asked me, hey, can you maybe do this piece of guest lecturing as well, filling in for this person. And then at some point, like I was just doing almost 50% of my time actually like teaching. So this year I actually started as academic head at CodeSpace. Also, I see there's a couple of my students also and ex-students in the chat as well. So hello to all of you guys. Yeah, so that is where I actually spend most of my time nowadays. Also, kind of very much involved in community things, FEDSA, which is what the platform where this talk is being done at, and then obviously Zapped, the ZI product design, and then obviously ZI Tech, which is 2 Slack groups that I'm very involved in. Also, for those of you that don't know, I don't have a formal background in tech. My background is actually in visual arts. Did a post-grad in illustration at Stellenbosch University. Wanted to become an artist until I kind of realized how hard it is to make a living being an artist. So made a transition to the world of tech, and also I think there's a lot of stuff I'm going to be talking about tonight that touches on this. And like I think tech kind of gave me an opportunity for some stability in my life. But yeah, I'll touch on that later. But yeah, for a big part of my life, I was kind of in the visual arts. Did a lot of open source work over the years. Nowadays, with my daughter, very hard to justify actually spending time doing stuff for free for people I don't even know. So yeah, I think my wife's not going to be impressed if she as I'm still doing a lot of open source contribution stuff. But yeah, I was very involved in kind of the open source world at some point. Um, do a lot of contract work, did some work for National Treasury, unfortunately. But that was a great learning experience, just working at that scale. Google Foundation, loads of like other. Um, and then I also have a life outside of work. So I live in the northern suburbs of Cape Town. Just give me a second. Okay, sorry. Yeah, as I mentioned, things are just all over the place at the moment. So, wife wanted to tell me something. So yeah, live in kind of northern suburbs of Durbanville. Have a daughter, about 1 year old now, and yeah, the second one is on their way. And then I'm all over the place. I often joke and I say that if people want to get in touch with me, um, you'll be able to find me quite easily. There's only so many Skulk Fenters in the world of tech, so yeah, there's not a lot of us. So you'll find me eventually. But I tend to pop up in some places. All right. So that part out of the way, let's talk some more about me. Yeah, unfortunately, but um, like it's kind of like this is kind of my best experience that I have with kind of mental health and so forth is my own kind of experience. Also see Skulk Neutling is in the chat. So, hey, Skulk. So, I had a really great chat with him. He runs the Mycelium Network podcast. I think we also spoke about a lot of these things. And I might have even been more tired than I am now. But it's probably the best time to talk about vulnerability and mental health and so forth when you're kind of not in your A game. But yeah, cool. So, as mentioned, some more disclaimers. Yeah, like obviously in terms of trigger warnings and stuff, I will be speaking about some stuff, specifically like suicide and so forth. That just be mindful of that. But then also just mentioning that I don't necessarily have a nice way to wrap and tie all of this up at the end. So this is mostly me kind of just trying to make space to, at the very least, have conversations about these things and kind of seeing what comes out of it. And with the possibility that nothing comes out of it and it's very confusing and no one really knows what I spoke about or why I spoke about it. And yeah, it's just a train wreck. But that is, like that comes with the territory. And like, if I want to talk vulnerability, then, that's as much as I can. All right. So, what I want to do tonight, I want to do four things. I want to just talk about my own story, my own journey in terms of mental health and mental illness and so forth. I also want to share another story about someone else, perhaps a bit more significant than me. Then I want to kind of chat a bit about my experience of the industry and like taking stock of where we are in terms of mental health and mental illness as a tech industry. And spoiler, you probably know what the answer is going to be. It's not that great. And then just kind of figuring out where we can go from here. Are there ways in which it can be made better? And this is also where I'm hoping some of the discussion and Q&A can come in. All right. So first time I did this talk, I have some people in here. I've censored them out because I never asked them for permission to actually put them in my slides. So if this is you, you're in my slides now. But yeah, so the first time I did this talk, so there's a mental health channel on ZA Tech, and I asked for a bit of advice. I effectively asked if you were to share anything about mental health or so forth, specifically within the context of the tech industry, what would be useful? What would something that you would be looking for to come from such a talk? And I effectively got like the advice that's the best advice and also the worst advice because it's the advice that I know is true, but the one I didn't want someone to say. And that is effectively talking about my own feelings. Not only in the context of it's always unpleasant kind of like just doing this type of thing. It's unpleasant talking about your own like mental health struggles and so forth, and being transparent about it. So like there's obviously like kind of a hesitance and stress and so forth from my side in terms of just actually sharing this. So maybe just being open about that. Yeah, like there's still a lot of stigma, and my hope is that eventually it'll like we'll reach a point where it's easy enough to talk about in this like within the same realm as talking about JavaScript or whatever. Um, and then yeah, once again, just being honest about kind of my own like kind of my own journey and so forth. So yeah, that I think that is where we'll start. And as mentioned, like I have quite a bit of experience doing tech talks. I really enjoy doing talks on tech. I really look forward to some of the questions that might be asked. I generally find myself very excited in terms of sharing actual um, things that I've uncovered in the tech world. These type of talks, not so much. I don't think anyone really enjoys doing these talks. So if any of you guys were at UX South Africa end of last year, so Gideon, who's actually in the comments, he ended off the talk by ended off the conference by doing a talk on um, imposter syndrome. And I think the response to that talk and just the amount of questions and the audience's response to that just indicated to me like that they just there's such a big need to have these conversations. Um, yeah, and once again, like so, if I want to do a talk about vulnerability and mental health, then I kind of need to do something that is often referred to in the tech industry as eating your own dog food, which is effectively generally using the actual product or whatever that you are developing. So if you are Facebook and your team is actually like responsible for React and maintaining React and so forth, then like it's generally a good idea for you to use React in your own product. Even if you think it sucks or there are actually better products out there. And I think to a certain degree, if I want to do a talk about vulnerability, I need to eat my own dog food here, and I need to actually like be vulnerable myself as well. Um, and so effectively like it's just a fun fact. So I think apparently there's some speculation that the term eating the dog food comes from some type of pet food company where the CEO ate like the dog food in actual like boardroom meetings or whatever, but it almost sounds too fantastical for me to actually be true. I also appreciate the fact that a lot of people say um, you know eating the dog food, like it's a cool concept, but the term isn't that great, and it should maybe be replaced by like eating your own ice cream or ice creaming, which to me is kind of like it defeats the purpose. The whole point is it shouldn't be fun. But yeah, talking about eating. So there's this guy called Mark Twain. You might have read some quotes by him. You might have read loads of quotes misattributed to him. I think this is one that generally like is correctly attributed to him amongst all the other ones that are incorrectly attributed to him. And he said something interesting. He said, if you eat a live frog for the first thing in the morning when you wake up, uh, nothing worse is ever going to happen the rest of the day. Like the worst part of your day is over, and the day just gets better from there. Um, and I think this is kind of how I'm going to approach this talk as well. So the part that there's like obviously the part that I want to start with, I think, is maybe a very radical like moment of vulnerability and transparency. And I think it's maybe good for me to just get it out of the way, and then I can relax a bit as well, because it's never fun to talk about it. And so I want to talk a bit about my experience um, with mental health and mental illness, um, going back to the year 2014. So this is probably the most pivotal point in my life. So up until then, I was studying for a solid 7 years, finishing up my master's degree in 2012. Kind of just burnt myself out so badly that I basically just collapsed and fell into a massive depressive episode. I like barely left my room. My brother and I were talking about it the other day, and he said, like, at that time he was in high school and he didn't really think much about it. But now that he's obviously a bit older and whatever, he thinks back about it and he's like, wow, man, like that was intense. Like, so I was basically room bound for like almost a year and a half. And I didn't know what was going on with me and whatever. And so I started trying meds for the first time, started seeing someone, and wasn't a great experience. Meds made it much worse. Tried some other meds, way worse. Um, and eventually, some way, I kind of got out of the funk a bit, and I left that experience being like, okay, like none of the meds or any of that really helped. So yeah, I think like I'm over it now, luckily, and I can go and live my life. And so I started actually looking for a job. And once again, like this is so far back. 2014 might not seem that far back, but um, yeah, like if you do the math, it's what like almost 10 years now. Wow. Um, and so like I'm obviously in a much different place in my life now, and it's very hard actually thinking back about that time period in my life and making sense of it. Because I'm so far removed from that. And a lot of the stuff, looking back at it now, just seems absolutely weird and crazy and insane. And um, if that's any consolation to anyone, like if you're at the moment going through a tough time and it kind of feels like it's never going to get better or it's never going to change or whatever, just know that like when I think back about that time in my life, it almost feels like like that was a different person. Like yeah, I can't even imagine how that was. So like definitely as things get better over time, you almost like kind of starts fading away in the back. But because of that, it means that I kind of need to maybe do a bit of archaeology, just to kind of get a sense for where I was. And so this is kind of a photo of me during that time, much younger, much skinnier. um, and so this is the next part, and this is where things kind of maybe started going a bit off the rails. Is so I can't really remember what or how, but um, a friend of mine was visiting from overseas, and we met up and whatever, and obviously took some selfies and so forth, and then the next day I remember very vividly, like I just started working then. I was taking the train to Cape Town, and I remember looking at the photos and kind of just having this massive sense of um it's so hard for me to say this because it sounds like it's embarrassing in retrospect, and that's why it's hard to talk about these things. But having this overwhelming sense that my mouth is skew, and like certainly it is to a certain degree, but I like who like in retrospect now when I think about it, like most people, no one's face is really symmetrical. um and like I just got so obsessed by this, and then I think at the time, there's definitely like was some obsessive. I don't want to say obsessive compulsive disorder or whatever, because I didn't necessarily have the compulsions, but there was like, yeah, I was dealing with a lot of obsessive and intrusive thoughts. Um, and so, luckily, I have kind of a bit of an artifact of that time. So, what I posted on, some of you might know Reddit. So, there's actually a Reddit post of mine, and So I was thinking about actually putting my Reddit username in the talk, and um, had a lot of hesitancy because, like, on Reddit, kind of like the anonymousness of your username is kind of like a big thing. But then I actually thought about the fact, like, this is probably the worst thing associated with my Reddit account. So um, like, there's nothing really else that I need to worry about. But yeah, so I want to kind of go over it. I want to kind of like just read what I wrote at that time. So I think I was speaking to um, someone who was also struggling. In retrospect, I was definitely struggling with a lot of like body dysmorphia, and kind of obsessive thoughts and intrusive thoughts about things related to my body. And I think I was speaking to someone else who said, like, I can't remember the context, but effectively the comment read as follows. So I effectively mentioned that, I kind of started developing the same types of thoughts regarding my facial feature structure um, in January that year. So that's about like 3 months before I posted this comment. So I woke up one morning, realized that my smile is skew. One corner of my mouth doesn't lift up when I smile. And I kind of fell into an episode of suicidal depression. Not being able to sleep or eat, sure, like this feeling, like, and I've been in these places several times in my life where, like not being able to eat just from like the stress is for me one of the worst places to be in the world. Um, and so I was convinced that people got uncomfortable in my presence due to how distorted my face is. I actually went to a plastic surgeon, and I often joke and said, the plastic surgeon told me that you don't need a plastic surgeon, you need a psychologist. But effectively, yeah, that's what it comes down to. He just said, like, yeah, dude, like, seriously. um, and but I said, like, even after that, I kept on obsessing about it, um, and started developing additional reasons for why my face looks strange and why it made people uncomfortable, from my teeth being yellow, my features being asymmetrical, and so forth and so forth. It's really embarrassing reading this. And I think it's embarrassing because I'm kind of being open about a part of myself that I can't even relate to now anymore. And if people were to ask me why did I feel these things, I can't really explain it. And the way that I've explained it in the past is it's almost like vertigo. So knowing that you're not going to die doesn't mean that your body doesn't react in a certain way. You're going to bungee jump, and someone tells you, like, dude, you're not going to die. Don't worry, you're not going to die. It's not. That's not. It's not as if then it's like, oh, okay, cool. I can relax now. So there's this weird disconnect where you realize that a lot of the stuff is absolutely insane, but it's almost like your body and like your mind reacts as if, even if you know like some of this is crazy, like as if it's true. So I started going to a psychologist in the hopes that he'll be able to help me either with one or two things. First, see that these thoughts are distorted, delusional, or help me accept and make peace with myself if that is actually the fact. Which, once again, now in retrospect, uh, seems like absurdity. I hope. I have reason to believe that now. I have reason to believe that my face isn't that distorted that it makes people uncomfortable. But um, at that point, I was very open to the fact that actually being the like possibly the case. And I also mentioned that I just started going, so I'm unable to say whether I'm actually making progress. But according to the psychologist, it's quite common for people with pre-existing social anxiety, which I had really badly at that time. Not so much nowadays anymore. I think you like if you do enough work, you get over it eventually. It takes time, but I think I don't really have much social anxiety nowadays anymore. Um, and also inclination towards low self worth. So those two factors, those generally mean that people develop crippling obsessions about their appearance. Also mentioned that I don't know the degree to which this is applicable to you. But the jump from I'm unattractive, even if true, to I want to kill myself is usually indicative of something deeper that needs to be addressed by a mental health professional. So looking back now, yeah, that like there's a lot of things there that is very hard for me to relate now, almost 10 years later. But I think it's important to show that, like, the severity of when you are in these places, like how almost you can't see past it. And yeah, and I think just for also for the sake of being open about like kind of my own story and my own struggles. And obviously, it was very clear that I needed to be medicated. So at that time, I tried medication once again, just purely from pressure from my family. And I actually thought that, okay, I'll just stay on it a while until they leave me alone and then I'll go off it. And it actually ended up making such a big difference that I was like, wow, oh yeah, I'm going to stay on this. And I think that is something that I find quite a lot. I've been part of a lot of support groups and so forth. And I definitely find there are people out there that have, they're kind of very stuck and it's hard for them to move forward without some type of medical intervention. Um, and they have such a big stigma around medication. Like I was definitely like this, that you almost do everything you can just to not have to go on medication. And but I think for me, at some point, I realized that that's unfair towards everyone around me because the ways that I cope with a lot of these things without medication is very damaging to people around me, and means also that things like I can't hold down a job, which probably means that I still need to stay with my parents and all of that. So I think at one point I was also just kind of decided, regardless of what I want, um, I probably need to give this a try. And today, I'm probably one of the biggest advocates of medication. I do think medication needs some serious destigmatization. And I would highly encourage anyone that if they kind of feel stuck and they like don't know what to do and nothing seems to get better and they are talking to someone, like I think your first step is always to talk to someone, but they're talking to someone and like it just seems like it's not getting better, to like explore medication as an option. You can always go off it later. And the other thing is as well is, sure, medication is like it's very hit or miss. So Gideon, who's in here, we often joke that like so I'm on the second one I'm on now is Vein Law, which is the one on the right. So I'm on both Cipralex and Vein Law at the moment. And he had such a bad experience of Vein Law. He's like, that, get that garbage away from me. Whereas for me, I kind of feel like Vein Law made such a big impact on my life. Whereas he had an amazing experience with Wellbutrin. And I was just like nearly manic. I was busy losing my mind while I was on Wellbutrin. I was at the point of like tearing off my clothes and running naked in the street level of madness just from Wellbutrin. But yeah, like and that's the thing as well. Like I think uh, you also need to be open to try different things. The reality is most of the time, and I can say this as someone whose wife works in pharmacology and has a background in pharmacology, um, we don't really understand much of the mechanisms in terms of how some of these things work. We know what they do and we know what the outcomes are from clinical trials, but we have very little understanding in terms of the underlying mechanisms. And then there's theories, and then those theories get debunked, and other theories emerge, and even the whole thing about like chemical imbalance and so forth is not even really something any modern day um, psychiatrists actually believe anymore. Yeah, like there's various theories in terms of why some of these elements that are in the medication actually help, but at this point it happens at such a low neurological level that it's beyond our understanding. But so because of that, like, but what's interesting as well is to a certain degree, my wife often tells me that if we knew just like how divergent things like even Disprin or Bernardo is, and what are the possible things that can happen to different individual people if they drink it, without us even actually knowing why that's happening, you would never take any medication ever in your life again. But yeah, so I can honestly say medication changed my life. As someone who was very against medication, it man, like it saved my life. And I always run the risk of maybe over advocating for medication. And I think there's a danger to that. Like that sometimes there are people that kind of try medication too quickly without exploring other alternatives. But worst case scenario, you can just go off it. But I do think because of the stigma, like there's a much bigger problem of people who would really benefit from medication, who have kind of a stigma and shame and almost feeling like they failed or they didn't try hard enough. So I'd rather try and on the other side and maybe over advocate for medication. It changed my life. I wish I could have gone. I wish I started on it sooner in my life. Um, yeah, and so 2021, my daughter was born, and she's about 1 year old now, and the next one is on the way. So these are all things I would never have imagined I'd actually be able to not only experience but have the emotional capacity to actually handle. And yeah, like, so if anything, I hope if you are kind of at a point and just feeling stuck, like I never thought things would get better for myself, but even if people told me that, even if I heard similar stories, I would be like, yeah, but I'm different, you don't understand, like I'm different, it's not going to work out for me. And yeah, yet it did. um but so I think what I actually want to take away from what I just shared, um is that after I did this talk the first time, um, I got a message from someone on Slack who effectively said, like, we used to work together for a very, very long time. We used to work very closely. And he said, like, oh, he actually watched the video. And he said, like, he never realized I struggled with any of, like, all this stuff and so forth. And yeah, like I actually thought about that, and I thought about it. It's not that I deliberately kind of misled him or misled anyone. It's just like I never spoke about these things with anyone. I never really, yeah, because in what context do you bring it up? But and then we had a very long conversation about it. And and this is kind of to me a critical point is that like this person who's was actually very close to me and who I used to work with very closely, didn't even know about any of this stuff. Like this stuff that was such a big part and almost traumatic part of my life. Um, and likewise, I've actually had fellow developers that I know, because I'm pretty open about like myself attending support groups and stuff, come to me and say like, listen, I'm can I maybe just come to the support group with you or whatever? And like some of these people I'd known for like almost a decade, and I'm like, I don't even know. And I'm super open about these things, but you never shared with me. It's yeah, it's I don't know, like, but like I'm saying this, and as I'm saying this, it's like I really feel how I don't want to be even having this discussion now. I just want to run away. So it's really hard talking about these things, and for that reason, so there's this really great book called The Noonday Demon by Andrew Solomon. It's quite a thick book. It's back there in my bookcase, where he kind of talks about this, and he says, there's so much pain in the world, and most of these people keep theirs a secret. So he's specifically talking about mental health and mental illness, rolling through agonizing lives. And I like the way he talks about in invisible wheelchairs and dressed in invisible body casts. And so I want to, like, from there, kind of, I mentioned I'll talk about my own story, then I want to talk about someone else's story, but which is, some of you might know about this story. You might know about Aaron Schwartz. And I think there's some key takeaways for me in terms of his story, and specifically regarding mental health as well. I just want to give a quick scan through the text chat. See if there are any questions. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them in there, and I'll try and respond. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad I see there's someone else in there also mentioning medication. They were super anti-medication, and it actually changed their life. Fainter brand maids. Yeah, no, those are the worst maids. Okay. How long before it starts working? Okay, so with Cipralex, I don't know. Like, it's they told me 3 months. After 3 months, I didn't really feel anything. And so I actually made a follow-up appointment with a psychiatrist to maybe like try something else. And before I actually went to go see him, I actually started feeling something. And once again, I didn't feel it. And I think, especially if you've never been on meds, it's not a feeling. Like, it's it's like you don't feel any different. But what I did start seeing is that, like, for some reason, I have much more functional days than non-functional days. There was a massive change in terms of, I would have much more days which was just a complete write-off, where I would just stay in bed and I would, like, not want to get up, and I wouldn't be able to even, like, everything felt so overwhelming. And then I would have less of these. And I think I started seeing that. And that's just how I assumed, okay, it's probably doing something, but I didn't feel anything. And I think a lot of people expect some type of feeling, like, oh, fuzzy or warm, or, yeah, like, even with the Venlaw, like, I don't feel anything. It's just like, if I just see the way I act, and like yeah, like, it just seems like um it's not even like things feel less worse or something. It's not like as if something happens and I'm like, shoo, this is not that bad. Like, without the vein law, this would have felt really intense. It's almost like, yeah, like, it's almost not even like as if it, like, makes things less worse. It's, for some reason, things are just less paralyzing. So I still feel like the stress, anxiety, all those things. But for some reason, I can get myself to a point where I'm like, all right, cool, all right. So what can I now do about this, instead of almost not being able to even construct two thoughts together just because it's so crushing? Yeah, that's like, it's very hard to explain. Um, yeah, weaning off drugs, please. Yeah, yeah. Don't mess around. I almost wanted to use a expletive, but don't mess around with drugs, guys. Well, drug. don't mess around with drugs, but also don't mess around with medication. Like specifically if you have a tendency to things like bipolar or whatever. Sure. Like a lot of my friends have gotten themselves in very dangerous positions and very scary places from trying to manage their medication on their own. Whether that be like, I think I'm going to start taking like half a tablet instead, or maybe trying to up one pill and bring the other one down, or whatever. Yeah. Whenever you like go on something or go off something, do that with someone that has a medical background and can actually keep track and be on the lookout for any things that might be um, might be like, yeah, warning signs. Because like also like a lot of times commonly when you start taking it, like you actually feel worse for a little while. Side effects, yeah, I still get a ton. Headaches. Get a lot of headaches, like crushing headaches. Just get them like randomly. But like also weight gain. Gained a ton of weight. But honestly, like those things are like nothing compared to like actually just being able to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. But yeah, there are side effects. Like anyone who tells you there aren't any side effects, yeah, be skeptical. But the good news is that there are different types of medications. So if you have things that for you are harder to stomach than others, whether that be nausea or weight gain or whatever, like there's options you can explore. So you almost kind of pick your poison to a certain degree. But side effects is a thing. It's a reality. But like what are the side effects of mental illness? That's uh, yeah, and like these can be basic things like just I was on something at some point that just meant I had to wake up like 9 times in the evening just to go to the bathroom, like during the night. um Let me maybe just do a quick read and continue. Okay, no, there's a lot of stuff there. Okay, I can maybe get back to some of that. All right, so let me quickly chat about our Aaron Swartz. So some of you might know about him. Some of you might have even seen The Internet's Own Boy. It's a phenomenal documentary. I think it's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. Super inspirational person. Like really played such a big role in the web, and the web that we have today, and also a lot of like civic stuff around the web when it comes to like net neutrality and so forth. Um, and so effectively, like you might know some of these. RSS. Those of you that are a bit older might know about RSS. Markdown. Literally my lifeline, which is Markdown. Everything is Markdown. My shopping list is in Markdown. Creative Commons. If you're kind of right, if you're a Python programmer, WebPy. Also, given the title of one of the co-founders of Reddit, that very site that I shared where I posted that comment in the beginning. So I think he joined Reddit 6 months after the founding. So he was very much part of the initial crew that created Reddit, back when it was much smaller. But then, like in terms of not tech only, but like kind of social and civic awareness and so forth, he was very involved in civic activism and so forth. Kind of started Progressive Change Campaign Committee in 2009. He was a research fellow at Harvard University. doing research into institutional corruption. And he was also very involved in what at the time was called SOPA, which was Stop Online Piracy Act, which came back again in the form a couple of years later by means of net neutrality. More an American thing than a South African thing, but like these precedents are important, and it's has to do with the degree to which ISPs can actually decide like what content and how like throttle specific types of content. Um, and he wrote on his blog. There's a very specific blog post that's being um, actually referred to quite a bit now in retrospect, which he says, I have a lot of illnesses. I don't talk about it much for a variety of reasons. I feel ashamed to have an illness. It sounds absurd, but there's still an enormous stigma around being sick. And so most people around him, family and so forth, kind of mentioned that he was probably speaking about depression. But that's kind of like the irony where someone like of this caliber who was so involved in terms of solving problems and kind of being involved in civic in the civic world and activism and so forth kind of was kept like this part about themselves hidden. And unfortunately, most of you probably know that like he actually died in 2013. He was actually found dead in his apartment and where he hanged himself. And so no suicide note was found, and which also makes it tricky talking about his death and the story leading up to his death. Some of you might know what it involves, but I also just want to point out, like directly quoted from Wikipedia, Sir Tim Berners-Lee actually delivered a eulogy at his funeral, which, wow, like you need to be like, so Tim Berners-Lee is the guy who effectively created the internet. So imagine the guy who created the internet gives a eulogy at your funeral. So like I think that speaks to the actual force of nature that he just was in the world of the web and so forth. So the reason, I just want to quickly talk about it. So what happened is, it's a long story. So he was doing investigation into uh, corruption and so forth. He was a research fellow at where was it? Safra Research Lab at Harvard University and so forth. And so what he did is he scraped a ton of academic documents on JSTOR. And there's a lot of speculation in terms of what he wanted to do with it. Some people say that he wanted to just kind of analyze it, um, which is something he did previously with some projects. Some people say that he wanted to make it freely available, in other words, circumventing the intellectual property. Because and I'll say this as someone who's also published research papers. It's a scam. It's such a scam, man. Like it's, yeah. I don't want to dig into that too much, but like, so he wanted to make the information like freely available and so forth. But anyway, so he was he was pursued for criminal charges by the state, and it's widely agreed that they wanted to make an example of him, and they were really, there was a massive overreach in terms of the charges, and which kind of led up to his suicide. And so there's obviously a big part of that, and so this is a really great article on it, which kind of mentions that a lot of people are blaming the U.S. attorney for Aaron's suicide, and and the outrage is justified. Like I think the amount of emotional and psychological distress they put him under just to make an example out of him is unprecedented and like disgusting. But also, like, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that he did struggle with depression for many years. And if we entirely just shift the focus onto the role that the US attorney played, we kind of miss an opportunity to actually talk about, like, people in the tech industry that have problems around mental illness and so forth. Um, and, like, to me, there's a real shame in terms of not only, there's a general sentiment that, like, if he has still been around, like, what else he could have done, because he already, even just in, like, the short span of his life, he kind of left such a big legacy. But also just in terms of the world of tech and mental health and so forth, it's such a, yeah, it feels like such a, like, a tragedy, actually. um cool. But so, I mentioned I want to talk about a story. I mentioned I want to talk about another story, which is his. Um, and the reason why I wanted to talk about his is that I think we need to be cognizant about, like, the stigma around these things. Like, even someone like him almost couldn't overcome that stigma and talk about it openly. Um, and then I want to talk about fun stuff, which is the industry. And so I said, you know, I wanted to take a bit of stock in terms of where we are as an industry. And, like, yeah, not great news, as you can imagine. So there's this organization called OSME, Open Sourcing Mental Illness. They do mental health tech survey every year. I still have the 2021 here. I should probably get the latest stuff. Um, but effectively, as part of the survey, there's two things that really stood out to me, which is, first and foremost, about only less than 30% of people say they would either be more comfortable or have the same level of comfortability talking about mental issues compared to physical issues. Large majority of people say they would be much more comfortable talking about physical ailments than mental ailments. Um, yeah, it's very unfortunate, the level. Who I can understand why people would say they prefer to talk about physical ailments, but sure, it's tragic how low the number even is for, at the same level, saying that, like, it's like, I'm equally comfortable talking about mental health with my coworkers or my boss, than I am with, like, physical health. And honestly, this is not really a big surprise. If we look at the question around, have you observed or experienced a supportive or well handled response to a mental health issue in the current workplace? Um, yeah, so, mm, maybe even a quarter of people said that, um, they have experienced or observed. That is insane. So that probably means, like, three quarters of all interactions in the workplace where mental health comes up is not handled well. At the very least, like, if, yeah, I almost want to say, if your answer to that question is maybe or I'm not sure, then probably also wasn't handled well. If you're not sure if it was handled well, it probably was handled badly. So, like, it's no surprise that people actually don't want to disclose this. Just looking at the track record of discussions around these things in the workplace. Um, and so this was 2020, kind of when the pandemic hit. Um, the Verge did an article a year later, in which they said, one thing seems to be clear. The pandemic has been terrible for our collective mental health. And a surprising number of tech platforms seem to have given the issue very little thought, um, which is very discouraging. And I think, especially now at this point, with the massive layoffs that we're seeing in the tech world. It's frightening. Just kind of how endemic mental health issues are in the tech world at this specific point, and how little is actually being done to address it, or actually even to talk about it. Um, but so here's the thing, like, even if you take a very pragmatic approach and you're like, like, life's unfair, sucks to be you. Um, Even then, like, most people in the survey said that they believe their productivity is affected by their mental health or by a mental health issue. Like, so even if you are just a colleague or a manager, and you don't really care about emotions, at the very least, you probably care about productivity. Um, so there's definitely a discussion that needs to be had there. And I think this is where kind of the disclaimer comes in, that I don't necessarily know what myself, you guys, or all of us can actually do about that. This is the part where I'm still trying to figure things out. But like, I think surfacing a lot of this stuff, I think these discussions just need to be had. Um, I like this quote in a book called Shipstar. Says, "Remember that people break down too, not just machinery." And I think, like, this is something we should keep in mind. And the problem is, to a large degree, this issue is being left to be solved by people who are struggling with these issues. It's kind of being put on their shoulders to actually figure something out, and figure out, how do we manage the problem that is mental health in the tech industry. Which is problematic, because I like this quote, which says, "Depressed people cannot lead a revolution, because depressed people can barely manage to get out of bed and put on their shoes and socks." Um, I'm in a very fortunate position where I've made a lot of gains in terms of my own mental health and so forth. But yeah, and I really care about this, and I really see kind of just how bad and toxic the current industry is regarding these things, and not wanting to talk about it. And like, it's almost, yeah, like, it feels overwhelming to me. I don't really know what to do about it, apart from just being open about my own journey and what I see. But so I think where I start seeing things being like maybe a bit of a silver lining is that, because there's no clear pathology to mental illness, there's no clear, so we have I think it's the DSM-10, and so forth, which are very subjective evaluations of when something is pathological and not, because all of us have, kind of strange and destructive and so forth mental patterns, and whatever. So when does it become a quote unquote illness? But so, like, and that's generally like considered, like, that's generally the approach, is that you think about function, like how it impedes you having a functional life, and not necessarily looking at like some internal diagnostic. So you're like, okay, to what degree is this impeding your ability to live a meaningful life? So because it's so squishy and subjective, like, there's no real point where it's like, okay, cool, this person is now actually like pathologically depressed, and this person is just like normally depressed. Because even, like these are all experiences we share as part of the human condition. And for some people, like, it's just like something, just their brain is just wired in a weird way, and these things are paralyzing. Like, I think in my case, I'm probably not the first person to think, hey, maybe my face isn't symmetrical, or hey, like, um, maybe my smile is a bit weird, or whatever. But the difference is, like, those thoughts to me were paralyzing, and like, literally, I didn't want to live anymore. I literally was suicidal because my face wasn't perfectly symmetrical. um but like, it's still part of a continuum. It's not like neurotypical people are completely unaware of what those things feel like. And I think this is kind of an important point, because I think if we we are to make any headway on this topic, is that one possible way in which we can find commonality with um, others in the working place around mental health, and kind of working on mental health structures, and making the workplace an area that's more conductive to positive kind of mental health, and facilitating people who are on journeys of recovery in terms of mental health, is um, is an interesting point, and that is that it's increasingly becoming um, clear that um, burnout, diagnostically, it's impossible to distinguish burnout from mental illness diagnostically. So if you have two patients and you don't know their actual history, you can just look at their symptoms. Like, there's no way to tell which one is suffering from a depressive episode and which one is suffering from burnout. So, and I think this is a good like meeting point for people that are maybe neurotypical and don't necessarily have a history of mental illness, um, but maybe want to like actually help and make the workplace a better environment, mental health wise, is for this to be an entry point. Because by definition, then, if the structures and the things you put in place to help deal and prevent people from getting burnt out and help manage burnout, and if someone has burnout, like how do they recover from that? That is actually going to help people who are actually struggling with other things that are not burnout, but kind of present themselves with the same type of symptoms, and so forth. Whether that even be like trauma or someone who's going through a very hard time, I just feel at the moment there's no such structures in place. I remember I worked at a company at some point, and my wife's dad passed away, and I couldn't get leave to go to the funeral because he wasn't immediate family. And I just found it interesting that there's a very deliberate, like, there's very clear rules in terms of, okay, here's where you get time for grief, and here's where you don't. But it's almost like like it wasn't, there was no empathy in terms of how those rules were actually made, or kind of enforced. But yeah, so as mentioned, like diagnostically speaking, like it's very hard to actually tell the difference between someone who's suffering from burnout and someone who's actually having a mental health episode. Well, unless that mental health episode involves psychosis, which I assume you don't get psychotic when you get burnout. But like in terms of kind of things like depression and so forth, um, and like this is also important, and I think it's also something we shouldn't forget, is that in that same Verge article that I mentioned, there was a survey in which they surveyed about 12,000 people within the tech industry, asking literally, are you currently suffering from job burnout? 57% of people said yes, meaning that um, if you just take a random person from the tech industry, just like pluck them out, and you check, are they currently burnt out? Um, Chances are it's more likely that yes, they are kind of suffering from burnout, which is crazy. Which means the minority of people are not suffering from burnout. Um, and yeah, frankly, it's a mind blowing statistic. Um, and I think this is maybe where a lot of the conversation for me uh, can start becoming helpful, and the conversations around colleagues and structures at work, and so forth is by framing it through the lens of how do we assist people that are struggling with burnout. Um, and I think then by definition, as you address that problem, you're also making space for people that are struggling with other things that kind of symptomatically present themselves as burnout. So when I just started out, like I couldn't work more than 3 days a week. And yeah, like it was just too much. Like I just like on the third day I kind of felt I couldn't get out of bed anymore. Which is ironic if you if you were to talk to my wife now, because she personally feels I work too much. Um but like once again, like like by having those structures in place, like let's say someone's really burnt out and they kind of need some way to just like recover and whatever, but like then like those discussions, those places to have those discussions, those like mechanisms, so forth, like also aid people who are dealing with other things. So just quickly personally, and I would love to just have some super quick conversation for those that are still around. But before that, I just want to mention some things that I found really helpful. So first and foremost, SADAG, South African Depression and Anxiety. I'll have to Google it. But SADAG is effectively like um, the big like mental health, mental illness, like kind of umbrella organization in South Africa. Um, they have like lots of really great services from helplines. I've used their helpline several times before. Um, as obviously, like they always require more funding, and they can only do what they can with what they have. So obviously, sometimes you need to be cognizant of the fact that it, like it's not like customer service from like a massive corporate that like is just rolling in money. But like they do amazing work. They also maintain a active list of all support groups in South Africa. And I highly encourage you, specifically if you find therapy expensive, and geez, that is expensive. And I'm saying this is someone who's only on a medical, on a hospital plan. There's prescribed minimum benefits and those things, but like, sure. I would encourage you to also seek out support groups. I've had a lot of I've had a lot of great experiences and healing experiences from support groups. So like yeah, generally you phone SADAG and they can put you in touch with support groups in your area that they generally vet, and they kind of check, okay, if are these guys legit and whatever. And also like it is a bit of a schlep having to phone them, but also you want to keep the support groups um, uh, kind of a safe space. So you also want to, at the very least, have people who are looking to join phone and just have a chat with them first, and so forth, and not just give the details to anyone to just show up. So SADAG is amazing. I highly encourage you guys to check them out. OSME, which is great as well. A lot of the survey stuff I mentioned comes from OSME, which is open sourcing mental health, mental illness. Sorry, my bad. They have great resources. Very much American focused in terms of, but they have great stuff in terms of legally. What are your legal rights in terms of can you be fired and so forth. I've been thinking about maybe compiling information like that for the South African context, maybe speaking to a lawyer or someone, or a psychologist, or someone who might give useful advice in terms of legally, in terms of contracts, in terms of those type of things. But it's just like I'm super keen to maybe do something like that for South Africa. Therapistdirectory.co.za, despite the super cheesy name, Like there's actually, yeah, like I've found therapists through there, really affordable therapists who actually help me a ton. You can search for specific things, and as with medication, with therapists, you sometimes it's hit and miss. Like I've had some really bad therapists in my life, and in the same way you get bad plumbers, you get bad programmers. Can you believe it? Like you actually get people who are bad at writing code. I know it seems impossible. You get people who are not really great therapists, and nothing personal, but some people just aren't that great. Um, and yeah, so like sometimes it's helpful to just try a couple and see what works for you and so forth. Um, Also, I've had a lot of success with because back when I was studying visual arts, obviously I was like earning next to nothing. I think my first salary was 3,000 a month. Um, like I actually went to the UCT, so Grote Skuur. I contacted them, and like you can actually use there's actually students who need to do their internships, need to do X amount of practical hours uh, in order to graduate, and like sometimes like they can assign someone to you, and then where you can get like go and see them as a therapist or so forth. And I remember I just paid, like I just had to pay to use the room that we used for the sessions, which is like 40 rand a session or something ridiculous. So that might also be an option, specifically if money is an issue. There's also crisistextline.org. I haven't used it yet. I can't speak to it, but I know about it. A lot of people have mentioned it. So you can message them on WhatsApp or Facebook, and it's almost like a helpline. Um, Seven Cups. I've tried Seven Cups at one point. Uh, it wasn't really that great of an experience for me. But like I'd rather list something that might be helpful to other people. So they also have trained volunteers and so forth who you can speak to. And then personally, Paul Gilmartin, he has a podcast on mental health. He's a comedian, really great, really um, entertaining, sometimes a bit vulgar. But if you don't mind that, like it's really great. Like it's very. I find the openness and honesty very encouraging and refreshing. And then lastly, if you're on ZRTech, there is a mental health channel. I'm pretty sure some of you that are here in the text chat is on there. If not, yeah, join us there. Like I think uh, a lot of like super supportive people, people trying to support one another in the tech industry, very much with the goal of supporting people. I think we've had people try and start discussions or arguments about like things related to mental health, and we generally kind of chase them away so they can make their own channel. Like that's not the goal of this channel. So but yeah, like definitely, if like you are on ZTech or you use Slack or so forth, join us on ZTech on mental health. um and yeah, that's about it. As mentioned, I wish I could wrap this up in a more meaningful way and like go like, all right, to summarize point one, two, and three. But I think that's part of it. I have a lot of thoughts around this. I'm still trying to figure out a lot of this myself. I just know that these conversations need to be had. Um, and so and also to add to this, if anyone wants to send me a message on LinkedIn or whatever and chat about these things, I'm always more than welcome to chat about it. Let me quickly check. All right. So I think we might have lost Justin. I don't know if Justin is still lurking in the
I'm here.
background. I know he has load shedding.
I'm here.
Oh, a while Justin appears. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
There are a couple of questions, Scott. First, thank you so much. There are
yeah,
a couple of questions. If you want to go through them, I'll pop them on the screen.
yeah. Like definitely. Cool.
First one.
Yeah.
Did you change any lifestyle stuff as well as
Oh,
exercise, sleep, etc.?
yeah. This is a hard one, and it's a hard one because I do find that people overstate the role that lifestyle changes play. Obviously, they play a big role, and they're like, to this day, I need to be cognizant of that. I don't really drink at all because of that, and like always like it's as an Afrikaner, it's such a hard conversation, like telling people that you don't drink alcohol because it's just like okay, but like why you have to explain yourself. But that's one of it. It's just like it's like I don't know, like it definitely has a not a great effect. I do drink now and then, but only on special occasions. Um, but definitely, I do feel a bit not that great the next day. Exercise, yeah, I try and exercise every single day, but I want to be clear that like I don't for me in my case those things weren't enough and for a very long time I tried to manage it exclusively through that and also, I just want to say quickly, like, there's a weird bug on StreamYard when Justin stops his video. It's a picture of me, which I find
There we go.
amazing.
I am
Yay!
Scott.
Welcome to the Skulk Fenter show. Yeah, so yeah, definitely. Like, I think that's a given. And some, like, I might be actually over stressing trying to be too cautious of saying that's enough. But like I take it as a given, like that is something that you need to focus on. Like you can't, like you're not going to make a lot of progress without actually thinking about yeah. And there's a question like and there's a remark about like not eating meat as an Afrikaner. Oh, okay, yeah. Man, Afrikaners scare me. But anyway, cool. Any other
Yeah,
ones?
there's another one from Gideon. How did you get past your
Yes.
initial hurdle of burning out, etc.?
How? Medication. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be able to work. Well, you can speculate, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to work 5 days a week without medication. Um, and is that fair or probably not? That I require medication just to be able to focus for 3 days on like back to back. But yeah, I don't know. Like for me, I can't really say, but like that was the only thing, the only change in my life where I could go to a place where I could work 5 days a week. And like maybe you have the and other people might be in other places where they might say that like listen, like I have the luxury of saying that I'm only gonna work 3 days a week. I didn't have that and I needed to figure out a way. um and like at the end of the day, all these conversations, like sorry to say it, but like all of these conversations at the end of the day comes down to like out of control capitalism. Like it is, you can paint it however you want, but like at the end of the day, uh, if you're struggling with any like mental health issues or like your biggest thing is trying to figure out how you can provide enough economic value to sustain yourself and buy food and whatever. And that's unfortunately
Yeah,
what it comes down to. And for me,
yeah, I completely agree
unfortunately,
with that. Yeah,
yeah, and for me, unfortunately, medication is part of that. Like if we were living in a society where I would say, I can only work 3 days and unfortunately, that's just the way I'm wired, or what I need. That's a different story. But most of us don't have that, specifically if we have a family. So yeah. I see there's also a
Yeah.
question around what medication I'm currently on. Yeah. I'm on Cipralex. Technically Zytomol, which is the generic for Cipralex. Other common generic for it is Lexamol. Then I'm on Venlor as well, which is so the Cipralex or the Zytomol is a SSRI, and then the Venlor is an NSRI. I'm not too clued up with the exact differences between them, but apparently they do different things. The Cipralex is definitely for my obsessiveness and my yeah, like it really helps a ton of that. And then the Venlor is more for just general getting out of bed.
Now,
Cool.
Scott, I just want to go back one to what you were saying about struggles being related to kind of social issues and more than individual problems sometimes. Not well, I mean that social problems cause individual issues. There's not, I think that sometimes gets lost in the mix when we talk about these things.
100%.
It tends to be very individualistic, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I can so recommend a book by an English writer and theorist called Mark Fisher, and it's called Ghosts of My Life. He suffered terribly from depression, anxiety his whole life until it got the better of him, actually, and he actually very, very sadly committed suicide. But Ghosts of My Life is very much his musing on not just individual solutions to problems, but also how the world around us affects us in our day-to-day life, under our economic and political and everything circumstances. So Mark Fisher, Ghosts of My Life. It's a short read, but wow, it's really an incredible book.
No, 100%. So I do also think, 100%, and I do agree with you. Like I think to a certain degree, it's like the what's his name, Chris Hedges. So he writes quite a bit about, like, so he has PTSD. He was a war correspondent, and kind of he's written a bit about like kind of his own experience and so forth. And he wrote some stuff recently where which I found really insightful, which he said kind of the actual most reasonable emotional state of us in this day and age should be a state of mourning, given kind of the state of humanity, given what we've done to the planet, just like the levels of suffering and poverty and inequality in the world. And so to a certain degree, you might say that some people are just more susceptible to these things, and they're more sensitively tuned to these realities. Because for me, like a big part of it is also existential. A big part of it is also trying to make sense of just like this madness that is like being a human at this time and place, and with everything like going on, and like all the injustices and pain. And is it not better to not exist at all and not even but okay, cool. But like this is getting way beyond the scope. But like there is a dimension. There is a reasonable dimension to it. But I think we should also be careful in terms of projecting too much onto that. Like I do think there are also biological realities. And at the end of the day as well, like even if you feel really strongly about it, even if you feel really strongly that there are political and social realities to a lot of mental illness and mental health issues. At the very least, in order to actually do anything about it and try and make things better, you need to like be mentally at a good place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Imp- yeah, so I think there's also the danger, and I was definitely at that point in my life at some point where you kind of embrace that a bit too much. And it's very you like I think it's like sometimes like there's a danger of it becoming a bit flagellant almost to a certain degree, where you're like almost hitting yourself with a whip and like being like, okay, like I'm being a real human, and everyone else out there is kind of just like putting on a happy face or whatever. At some point you need to be like, okay, cool, let's just practically, like, it can't go on this way, like we need to figure something out.
Yeah. One
Any
last
other
question, Scott, which is speculative, perhaps.
I quickly have to Google what that even means. Give me a second.
So it's Scott, it's when you have to no longer feel pleasure in things that are supposed to give you pleasure.
Are you literally reading that from Google right now?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Because
Why is that exactly what they say?
Yeah. Like I blame my Afrikaans background. Like as I say, I was speaking deliciously since I was twice. So yeah, like that is tricky. And so my question is, would that be related to, like, as an effect of a possible side effect of medication, or would that be as an actual problem that needs addressing in itself? Justin, I don't know if you can maybe speak, given that you know the exact dictionary definition, speak more to what that specifically refers to.
I just know what it means. I'm afraid I don't have input other than that.
So I can maybe speak. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So I can maybe speak to that. Okay, so yeah, like, so the way I've generally experienced it is, okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but I think first and foremost, I generally experience it more as meaninglessness instead of the not finding pleasure as itself a problem. Because to me, not finding pleasure in things is fine, and I can cope. And as someone who's gone a year, like who last year this time had a newborn baby, sometimes like just weeks go by, and it's like you just like what did I do this week, or like I'm just like getting by. But to me, that's fine as long as there's some type of meaning, and that's just personally how I'm wired. So to me, it's only tough insofar that it's like, okay, I'm not getting pleasure from anything, but there's also no meaningfulness in the kind of the dullness. Like, why do I brush my teeth? Why do I make my bed? Like, why do I go through all these things, and if everything's unfulfilling and I don't get any fulfillment? Like, I think for me, it manifests more in terms of fulfillment. In terms of not getting pleasure from things, as always, I think it, like, you would, like, there needs to be a certain window here. Like, are we talking about, like, oh, this has just been a tough week, this has been a tough year, or this is kind of your default mode of existing? But honestly, I think the fact that it's significant enough for you that you're thinking about it probably is sufficient to speak to someone about it. Because one thing I do, I realize myself, and like I also see day in day out when I'm in support groups, is we tend to err too much on the side of normalizing things. We err too much on the side of thinking things, this is just how everyone else feels. This is just like how it is. This is just how life is. And not necessarily the other way around. And like, it's much rarer, if at all, that I see people being like, I thought I was maybe being over dramatic, and I thought I was, like, there was something going on, but I spoke to a therapist or whatever, and they said like, you know what, it's just regular life, everyone feels it's like, it's often the other way around. I often find that, like, because it's the only reference we have, we kind of think that that's how everyone else is feeling. So I would definitely encourage you to go speak to someone about that. The fact that, like, you're even just thinking about it is probably sufficient. And yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a good comment from Gordon around that. I'm just going to put it on. That anhedonia could be the result from some larger issue, underlying issue like depression. Because depression can manifest itself in many different ways.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. So I think that's a great comment. Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it's, once again, like, I think we should be cautious to try and define things too clearly, because even in the medical field, there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of disagreement. Once again, like, at the end of the day, like, according to the DSM and so forth, what you go on is the functional impact on your life. Regardless of what it is, like, there's no objective measure of, okay, this is really bad depression, this is really bad anxiety or whatever. There's no measurement. It's like, what you look at is you look at the effect it has on your life. Is it impeding your life? Is it actually making it hard for you to live a functional life and just stay afloat? But yeah, 100%. Let me do a quick last one. Maybe one of my choosing. Let me quickly see. I'm just glad there was so much discussion, because it's always, the fear is always just like, you're going to speak about these things and people are going to be like, why is this guy so flippin' obsessed about this? Like, I don't know why. Like, I'm having the time of my life, going to work, looking forward to the day, getting fulfillment 9 to 5 the whole day through. What's this guy all on about? And I think specifically because you make yourself so vulnerable, you always. But so, like, just seeing that people relate to it is encouraging. Yeah. So maybe lastly, like, I think one thing that I see there is, I'm not saying, like, and neither am I saying this, or neither are any of the studies that I reference saying that burnout and mental illness are the same thing. They definitely are not. But, like, as Pamela rightly mentioned, burnout is something that you recover from. But diagnostically, when you're in the process of being burnt out or in a depressive episode, diagnostically, it's very hard to tell whether it's burnout or a mental illness episode. But yeah, 100%. Like, the reason why I am on medication is because, like, I can't just, like, sit and relax and go to the beach and take a holiday and then I'm going to be rejuvenated. It's probably going to be worse when I come back, because I spent a lot of time thinking. But yeah, okay, cool. This is really great. Thanks, everyone. I think there's definitely room to do something like this again. I would love to maybe do some type of panel discussion as well.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent.
Maybe I can bully some people into speaking openly about their stuff as well. But yeah,
you can if you don't use the word bully.
This is a non
safe space, Scott.
it's a safe space. Like I'm gonna very assertively persuade you by means of logic and appealing to your humanity. Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I hope this was of value.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I just quickly want to mention, I did mention that I want to kind of start compiling some type of resource in terms of maybe legal things that might be helpful, places you can maybe look for, like support groups and those type of things. If any of you guys know about someone I can speak to, specifically on the legal side of things, around like by law, what protections you have as someone with a mental illness and so forth, in terms of employability and so, like, please let me know. I'm definitely keen on compiling some resources around that. Cool.
Great.
Thanks everyone for
Great.
joining.
Yeah. Let me just, thank you so much, Scott, for taking your time to do this and answering the questions. And I think for such a frank and open discussion, really great. And thanks so much to all the people who joined and commented and asked questions. It's been a really great session. Yeah, really great. This will be available as usual on the YouTube channel. So if you want to share it with your colleagues or friends or ever, please go ahead and do that. We always just post the link in the ZA Tech Slack channel once it's all been rendered and so on by YouTube. Okay. Great.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
And we will see you. When's the next one?
Tuesday for design job, Wednesday for React.
All right. I will see you, hopefully some of you next week.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool. Cheers, guys.
Bye.